This podcast is about introducing our fans to the animals, plants, and other products that we work with at Josh's Frogs. It's an opportunity to paint a picture of our hobby that is refreshing. We want you guys to be successful with the animals that you're keeping, and we want our hobby to grow ethically and sustainably into the future. Hello and welcome to the Josh's Frogs podcast. Today I have Gio. We're going to talk about mourning geckos. But before we get talking about that, I wanted to say that the Josh's Frogs podcast is sponsored by Josh's Frogs. We're your one-stop shop for everything reptile and amphibian related. We carry everything from the animals that we breed in-house to the food that those animals eat, from feeder insects to dry foods, and then all the supplies you need to take care of those animals. The cool thing about us is that we're shipping all from one location. So you can get your box of crickets, your light bulb, and your crested gecko food all in one box from us. So kind of unique in that way. We also like to make keeping those animals easy. So we produce a lot of video podcasts like this and some how-to guides and care sheets and that kind of stuff. We want to make keeping these animals easy. So we try to create a lot of content around that to make it easy and have a customer service team that's always available to help out as well too. So without further ado, Gio, will you kind of explain how you heard about Josh's Frogs and how you got started here and when that was, that kind of stuff?
Okay. I'd heard about Josh's Frogs when I was in college. I was part of the MSU Herpetology Club, and Josh's Frogs had shown up at multiple events throughout the years just to collaborate with the Herp Club and show off the cool stuff. Later on, my girlfriend ended up getting a job here working in the tree frog and toad department, and she recommended that it was a great place to work with some species that I was really passionate about. I really like day geckos. We do a lot of day geckos here, and so it just seemed like a natural fit.
Cool. Now, how long ago was that you actually started working here at Josh's Frogs?
Was 1 year and 8 months.
Oh, cool. Now, pretend you're talking to our aunts and uncles that don't know anything about keeping day geckos and that kind of stuff. Can you explain, like, what are the tasks that you're doing on a weekly basis? Like, what are you doing? What is it? Taking care of the animals? What does that actually mean? What are you doing?
Okay. Well, obviously, feeding and misting are the two. Feeding, misting, and cleaning are the three biggest tasks, and from there, it's a lot of smaller tasks. From taking care of the food, making sure it's well fed and taken care of, keeping the room clean, general sweeping, researching our animals is a big part. There's always ways to improve your husbandry, always ways to improve their enclosures, and it just kind of spirals from there.
Cool. A lot of times, even some troubleshooting and trying to figure out issues and trying to figure out what new ways of doing things.
Absolutely.
It's been really cool. So today we're going to talk about mourning geckos. Can you, to somebody who's never heard of a mourning gecko, like, what is a mourning gecko? What is it?
Okay, so mourning geckos are a small species of gecko from Southeast Asia. They are, well, I have one with me right here. Rather small. They are a colonizer species, which means their niche is to raft from island to island and colonize new areas. So they're rather generalist in their needs. No one's actually sure exactly what island they started on in Southeast Asia, but we know the end result is that they're pretty much everywhere in Southeast Asia, as well as since humans have created global shipping, they've also hitched a ride into the neotropics in Central and South America, as well as I think they've just started to colonize Florida.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised at all. They tend to be pretty prolific and tend to be pretty resilient as well too. Talk about size, like how big is a mourning gecko when it comes out of the egg, and then how big do they grow as they get older?
Right out of the egg, I mean, they're little bitty things. Maybe about inch and a half, and very, very thin.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is probably the largest female that we have. Another neat thing about mourning geckos is they're well known for being parthenogenetic, which is a fancy word for they don't require a male to reproduce. They are an almost entirely female species. Males are a very, very rare occurrence and are almost always sterile. So they just, instead of having a combination of two individuals' genetic material. It's just every baby is a clone of their mother.
That is really cool and unique. A lot of people will confuse it when we're talking about mourning geckos. They're like, what does that have to do with the morning? Like, good morning. Like, what does that have to do with? Like I always point out, like, hey, it's morning. Like, they're really sad because there's no males, and then everybody laughs and like, I don't think they're really sad about that. I don't think they're just fine.
I've yet to figure out. I've heard that it was one of the peoples that are from their native range named them that, but I've not been able to figure out which one.
Interesting. That's so cool. Now, their gecko, like, talk about how are they different than keeping some of the other geckos? Like, I know you work with some day geckos. How are these different than day geckos? But then some of the common geckos that are part of our hobby, crested geckos, leopard geckos, those kind of things, tokay geckos. How are these different or similar than some of those other geckos?
So in terms of care for like a tokay or a cresty or a day gecko, they're similar in that they care much more about vertical height than horizontal. They're an arboreal species. As many sticks and logs and branches, opportunities for them to climb, they'll use them. High humidity, like tokays, cresteds, day geckos. Where they differ from, say, example, day geckos is that they are. There's been arguments on whether they're crepuscular or cathemeral. They mean very similar things. I personally believe they're more cathemeral based on what we see with our breeders, where they are active for short periods of time throughout the day and night. You'll see them basking for short periods of time, and then they'll go to sleep, and then they'll wake up a little bit, go look for some food, and then go to sleep again. And
which makes them a lot better captives than some of the nocturnal lizards that you just don't experience them interacting in their cage.
Exactly, yeah. As opposed to like a cresty, which is probably going to be asleep most of the day.
Yep, exactly. Cool. What are we feeding mourning geckos? They tend to be a smaller gecko. What are they eating on a regular basis here at Josh's Frogs?
At Josh's, we feed the adults twice a week. We feed them rapashi, various flavors work, whether it be the grub and fruit mix or the crested gecko diet. They are not too picky about it. We feed that once a week, and then we feed a large serving of crickets, gut-loaded crickets, once a week. Generally enough so that if there are any dominance issues in a colony, the less dominant ones have enough on day 2 or 3 to pick at them.
So you talk about crickets. What size crickets are we feeding to those guys?
These guys, I feed quarter inch.
Quarter-inch. Okay. Cool. You talked a little bit about breeding and being parthenogenetic. Like, how do you get them to start laying eggs? And talk about the breeding process. How do they glue their eggs, and how do they take care of babies and that kind of stuff?
So getting them to breed is not all that hard. Essentially, if they're not dying, they are breeding. But what the breeding looks like for these guys is, or gals, sometimes they'll pseudocopulate, sometimes not. As long as they can see another female, they'll just start producing eggs. After they're done gestating, you can actually see, I don't know if you can probably see from this distance, once the eggs are fully shelled, you can actually see them through their stomach. Wow. Then they'll lay them on essentially any hard surface, whether it be wood, rock, a little tube you provided for them, the tank wall. They'll cement their egg to that surface until it's ready to hatch.
Do you how long until they hatch? Like, what's the gestation period?
With the temperatures we have here, 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
Generally on the lower end of that.
Cool. And then when they're hatching out, how often are the mothers eating the young? Like, is that a common occurrence? Does it happen 50% of the time? What's the mortality rate if we're keeping them in the tank with the parents?
I wish I had that number. I can say that the mothers try quite often. They're not successful very often. Usually they'll just get part of the tail, and then the baby will get away. I would recommend separating them if you want to keep the babies.
Cool. Now, you talked a little bit about them laying on the surface of the glass. Is there a way to get the eggs off the glass that you know of to protect them, or is it, hey, you just really need to provide enough spots stuff that you can take out of the cage if you need to?
I've not found a way that's safe and consistent.
Yeah.
If they're on the glass, if they're really weakly glued, sometimes they'll just fall off when you poke them. I'm not usually that lucky. So there's a few options that you can go with if you want to make sure that you can collect those eggs. You can provide lots of like bark that overlaps each other for them to wedge themselves into, lay into those crags, or you can provide like tubes that you can remove from the tank for them to lay eggs in, or if per se they lay their eggs on the glass, you can try to tape a cup with holes in it over the top of that egg and just try to keep that cup humid if you can. Haven't tried that last method all
Hmm.
that much, but I've heard it suggested.
Oh, interesting. And so you kind of remove the cup once the eggs are hatching and
Yeah.
keep the baby in there. That's a cool idea. I love that idea. Cool. Now, people have been known to keep these with other animals. Like, what are some considerations that you'd need to keep in mind when you're keeping these with other animals? And they're kind of the poster child for cohabitation in the herp hobby right now. What are some things you'd keep in mind if you're going to keep them with other animals?
Um, I'm always cautious when it comes to cohabiting animals. However, or morning geckos are one of those exceptions where it works surprisingly well.
Mm.
They don't seem to pay all that much attention to amphibians, from what I've found, assuming they're not small enough to eat.
Yep.
I wouldn't put these with a baby dart frog.
Yeah.
But assuming everyone's outside of feeding range and whatnot, uh, they work really well with dart frogs. I imagine they work just as well with mantellas.
Yep.
I assume.
Yep.
Um, Mainly because dart frogs are primarily using the ground. Or morning geckos are using the vertical aspects of the tank. They're active at opposite ends of the day, so they're not really competing much for space. The only things I would keep in mind are make sure that whatever you're feeding the morning geckos isn't going to hurt the dart frogs,
Hmm.
and make sure you have enough ventilations for your morning geckos to breathe.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
that's really the only point of conflict.
Cool, cool. Since you're feeding the morning geckos, the rapashi, another consideration is that tends to be a magnet for the fruit flies when you're keeping dart frogs. So
Oh,
something to keep in mind too, that it's going to attract all the dart frogs to the
interesting.
rapashi foods as well too. You talked a little bit about caging. What size cage are you putting them in, and then like how many are you putting in one single cage? How are you guys housing them?
What I would recommend for uh our customers and for people keeping morning geckos is, generally speaking, 3 to 4 in a 12 by 12 by 18 glass terrarium. Generally speaking, I try to give these guys more space than, I don't know. I would say the industry standard. We're trying to improve husbandry.
Yep.
They are a social species, so you can keep them together and they will interact. They will posture and display, and they like to chirp to each other and communicate. It's very entertaining. But just like people, they do like their space. Everyone wants to have their little territory. So I tend to err on the side of bigger is better.
Cool, cool. Now you talked about space in the terrarium. How are you setting them up? Like, what are some of the things that are in the cage with them?
So different aspects of the tank are set up for different um to meet different needs. Down near the bottom of the tank, I would recommend like probably stacking various layers of bark or cork or something like that, um, and or dense plant vegetation, just to give them a nice place to retreat to if they get spooked. Whereas higher up, just branches or logs or bamboo, something for them to climb on, something for them to bask on when they want to. I like to think the aquarium analogy. When you have an aquarium, your fish can use 100% of that space.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a gecko, they need something to climb on. They can't swim.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Blank air space is worthless when it comes to terrestrial animals. Cool. All right. What about temperature, humidity, and how much are you misting? Like, how are you managing temps and humidity in the with those guys, and what are you trying to aim for?
With these guys, we're lucky enough that our room is pretty good ambient temperature that we don't need supplemental heating. Around, what was it? 75 to 80 degrees is a good
Okay,
benchmark for temperature. Um, if you put a basking spot on there, I don't think they would mind. I just don't know how much they would use it.
gotcha.
Um, as for humidity, 75 to 85%. Just keeping it consistent. I'd recommend both manually misting and a misting system. The misting system we use is to help maintain those humidity levels, whereas manually misting is to spike it.
Cool, cool. Now I noticed that that girl has a very yellow belly. Like, are there different color variations among mourning geckos? And I know there's Hawaiian ones now as well too. So can you talk a little bit about some differences in just appearance among those
Sure.
that we didn't talk about earlier?
So, mourning geckos have a variety of morphs. To my understanding, different people call them different things. Some people call them like type A, B, C, or D. We use more common names here. There's the generic mourning gecko, which it's the generic mourning gecko. It's brown with black blotching and generally a lighter belly. Then you have your yellow bellies, which is what I have here, which tend to have more warm toned brown on their back, as well as a bright yellow and speckled belly. Yeah, she's all fired up right now. I don't know how that correlates to locale, but it's mainly based on morph.
Yep.
Hawaiians, on the other hand, are mainly known from Hawaii. They're known for having extra blotches on their shoulders and their hips, dark blotches. And then high expressions are a morph of a morph, essentially, of Hawaiians, where they have a variety of dark blotches just all over their back and more irregular patterning.
Oh, cool. Cool. All right. Talk about care as in like what do most people get wrong, or what's the big mistake that people make when they're setting up? You mentioned one was like providing open air space that's useless to them. What are some other things that keep in mind that the people might mistakenly set them up incorrectly? What are some things to keep in mind?
I think the biggest thing for mourning geckos is a lot of people assume that since they're active a lot during the night, that they don't need UVB.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, I've found quite the opposite. When they're provided UVB, they are basking a considerable portion of the day.
Yeah.
And it might not be open basking, but they'll have a leg out or their
Yep.
tail out, or sometimes even their whole body out, just right underneath that light as close as they can get. And I found that it tends to correlate to more healthy individuals.
Oh, cool. Cool. Awesome. Hard, easy. How would you put these in comparison to other animals that are in our hobby? How hard or easy are they to keep it compared to other types of geckos or other types of exotic pets?
This is probably the easiest lizard to keep on the planet. Like they have conditions they prefer, but even if you're new to the hobby or new to keeping reptiles, they're a very forgiving species. Good for learning what you're supposed to be aiming for.
Oh, cool. Anything else we should know about mourning geckos before we move on to the lightning round? Anything you want to say about mourning geckos?
Let me just check this real quick. I have notes, and this is what they're for.
Awesome. Then we'll do the lightning round. All right. Give us the first thing that comes into your mind when I ask these questions. If you can't think of anything, we can pass on one, but just give me what's coming to your mind first off. So if money and space were no issue, you had unlimited money, unlimited space, what's the one animal that you would keep?
A caiman lizard.
Really?
They are fantastic animals. They look like a crocodilian, but a lizard. But they need a massive water feature, a massive terrestrial area, and a massive vertical area. And their diet's difficult.
Yeah.
Maybe one day.
All right. Besides Josh's Frogs, what's one business or breeder that's doing some amazing stuff? Either a really cool product or a breeder that's doing some really cool things with animals. Who's somebody you'd give a shout out to?
I've had really good interaction with Rep Room.
Oh, cool.
They do a really good job with a variety of niche day gecko species. A lot of species we don't keep here.
Cool.
Like Sunbergii, Madagascarensis, and Borbonica especially. They have some really nice Borbonica.
Oh, cool. Awesome. All right. What was your first pet that you ever had?
It was a blue gourami, which is blue tropical fish from Southeast Asia, about this big. They got these little like fin rays that trail down beneath them. It was a cool fish.
That's cool. That's a unique first fish. For most people will not get that. Usually it's a goldfish, guppies, or some live bear. That's cool. All right. In the entire world, what is your favorite animal or plant? Like in the entire world, what's the coolest animal or plant?
Without a doubt, the Indian gharial. And I'm probably mispronouncing that. There's a lot of ways, but you know the one.
That's cool. And what about that?
I've always adored crocodilians. They're wonderful. And I don't really know how else to describe other than they're just fantastic animals. Gharial is so unique. Their life history is very strange among crocodilians. They're one of the largest on the planet, and yet they only eat fish.
Yeah.
Like you could. This is not advice, but I wouldn't be surprised if you could swim with them.
That's so cool. That's so cool. All right. When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Whatever Steve Irwin was.
Yeah.
As I've gotten older, I realize is somewhere in between zoo curator and fishes and wildlife manager. So
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. If you had a free hour, no one's bothering you, it's just you. What are you doing with that free hour? What's your free time activity that you love to do?
I think I'd probably go with painting.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. All right. Last question, probably the hardest question. Got a bunch of people that are listening to you. What's the one advice or reminder that you would give to people if you had everybody's ear for a few seconds? What would you tell them?
A lot of people in my life have said that nice guys finish last, and my response to that is kindness is not a weakness.
Yeah.
It will get you farther in life than you ever really know, and it's not immediately apparent.
Cool. Thank you, Gio. If you are ever on Josh's Frogs, checking out some of the stuff that Gio does, so that's any of the day geckos, morning geckos, that kind of stuff, the what I like to call the warmer geckos for us. You can see him doing some of that. He doing videos, lives, that kind of stuff. But then also some of the writing as well too on our website and whatnot. So check him out on there. Otherwise, thank you, Gio, for educating us on morning geckos.
It's been fun.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoy this content and want to stay up to date, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow us across social media. We always want to bring you the best content, so let us know what you think in the comments. And for all your reptile and amphibian needs, be sure to check us out at joshsfrogs.com. We have an amazing selection. Until next time, stay curious, stay froggy, and keep exploring.